am so happy to welcome you to the first evening of the Redlands Climate Action Series. So I can't even express how wonderful it is to see so many people in this room who are concerned about climate change. That means a great deal to me. My name is Linda Hamilton. I'm a longtime resident in Redlands, and I'm the coordinator of a new program in Redlands called Accelerate Neighborhood Climate Action. So we say ANCA for short, okay? I am also a mother, a grandmother, and a great-grandmother. And I want to tell you, never did I dream just a few years ago that I would be working full-time, actually more than full-time, on climate change. But 3 years ago, I woke up to what's happening with climate change, and I realized how fast it's accelerating. And can you all hear me? And how fast and how bad it's going to get. And I became deeply worried about the world that my children, my grandchildren, and my great-grandchildren are going to be facing. It's a world where storms are growing much more frequent and severe, where flooding, drought, and wildfires are happening more often and lasting longer, where food and water shortages are affecting more and more people, and where pandemics are far more likely. And there's so much more. Their world is already very, very different from the world I envisioned for them. So they are my primary motivation for doing what I'm doing, and because I, frankly, am very scared for them. So this series is an opportunity to discuss what is at stake as the planet warms to temperatures that have never before been experienced by humans. And also what we as individuals, families, and neighbors and community can do to lessen the harm and increase our resilience to withstand the impacts of severe climate change. I have a sense of urgency about this. Just today I was reading a quote from the latest IPCC report that I hope you've all heard something about. And the statement grabbed me. It said, we have just a brief and rapidly closing window to secure a livable future. Remember the movie Don't Look Up, how we saw it? I remind you of that. So before we do get started, I want to begin by asking you to turn to the person next to you, preferably not the person that you drove here with. And I just want you to share very quickly your name, and I want you to share the thing that most concerns you about climate change. So just one thing, you'll have 1 minute each, and Becky has a little bell over there. She's going to ring it after 1 minute, and then you change, and the other person can share what they are most concerned about, and then we'll hear a few from the whole group. So Becky, you want to ring one bell to get us started? And, yeah. Go. Denver? A few words or no more than one sentence. What was one? Anybody? Call it out. Yeah.
Great crowd.
Oh, great crowd. Other concerns about climate change? Pardon me? Death of the planet. Couple more? Who else?
Uncontrolled migration north.
Of climate refugees. Right. Yeah. One more. Anybody? Water. Water. Okay. All right. And there's so many more, right? We can talk about this. Yeah. All right, but before we start our presentation, I want to give you a little bit of background on the ANCA program. It started about 5 years ago by some colleagues of mine in Denver, Colorado. And they had the idea to bring climate action down to the neighborhood level. And they developed an event to involve people at the neighborhood level in planning for their own future. They called it a Neighborhood Climate Action Forum. And what that event is in a neighborhood is neighbors getting together. It's a facilitated event, a professionally facilitated event, where we do some climate education, and then we do some visioning so that a product of this event is a very specific vision for that neighborhood of what a climate resilient neighborhood actually looks like. And then we go from there ultimately to developing a very detailed action plan that people in the neighborhood can rally around and get involved in. So it gives everybody something to do. And in Denver, they've done 15 of these already, and have a lot of different things going on in neighborhoods. It's very exciting to see all the things that they're doing. And last year, the city of Boulder adopted the program, and that perked my interest because I've been following the program. And Boulder is a city the size of Redlands. Did you know that? I thought it was bigger, but no, it's the size of Redlands. And they're doing a lot of climate action there. But they saw the value in getting down to the neighborhood level. So that's, when I heard about Boulder, that's what got me interested in bringing this program to Redlands. So this neighborhood-based program, it works from the bottom up. And a neighborhood, that's where everybody can get involved and make a difference. It's where individual actions can become collective actions and where they can begin to impact local policy, which is critically important. And it's been shown many, many times over that it's the neighborhood where you live that is the most important when things really start to get rough. So here in Redlands, we have a local steering committee that has helped to launch the program. And I'd like to introduce any members who happen to be in the room. If you can just stand and say your name. I can't see where you are, so just stand up and say your name. Mario, I see you back there. You're already standing.
I'm Mario Saucedo.
Who else is in the room? From our security.
I'm Claudia Ruiz.
Anybody else in the room? They're all down to do. Diane?
Yeah. Diane Ramirez.
And I think that's what's the other.
Bill.
Oh, gee, way back there now. Sorry. Okay. And then we also have, we call it an ANCA program team. And we have Becky. Becky, can you stand up there? Becky Foreman. We'll be hearing more from her in a little while. And Kyra Delger, who you will also be hearing more from her. And we also have a group. Oh, that's what we said, sorry. We also have a number of organizations that are lending support of various kinds to this program. They include the City of Redlands, the University of Redlands Environmental Studies Department, and other environmental groups in our community. Are there any local officials here tonight? I don't think I saw any. Okay. So our agenda tonight is very simple. When I get done here, we're going to have a 40-minute presentation, and then 10 minutes for Q&A, and then a brief guided discussion, and then our closing. And we hope very much that you all stay for a while afterwards to get acquainted and check out the amazing resources that we've discovered over there, have some cookies or whatever, and just get acquainted. So I'd like to then begin introducing the speakers. And the presentation, I just want to say first, tonight is a little bit different than the four that will follow. They will each have a 3-member panel, and there'll be one person from the university, There'll be a person from the city, and then there will be a person from ANCA. And they will be addressing a specific impact that we anticipate or have already seen impacting Redlands. But tonight, as a context for the coming weeks, we will have an overview of the current global situation, and then how it is already affecting Redlands and will in the future. And then finally, we're going to hear about what climate community is all about, what that actually looks like in the community. So I'll begin by introducing John Walsh. I know a lot of you in this room are John, right? John is the longest serving chaplain at the University of Redlands. He retired in 2020 after holding the Omer E. Robbins Endowment Chair for 22 years. And apart from advising all religious groups on campus, he also taught courses on religion, civil rights, and the environment, and actually still is teaching, right, John? And he began his professional career in 1973 as Baptist chaplain at UC Berkeley. He also served as chaplain at Harvard, Princeton, and Middlebury College. And he worked with former Vice President Al Gore as a presenter of the documentary An Inconvenient Truth, which I think a lot of you have seen, right? And then our second speaker is Tyra Delger. Tyra is a biologist and an environmental planner who has done work in the field of climate resilience. She has a bachelor's degree in ecology and evolutionary biology from the University of Colorado and a master's of science in environmental management from the University of San Francisco. So we're very delighted to have both of them here tonight. And without any further ado, let's have John come up and begin the presentation.
This is the only way I have a chance. Linda began with the beginning of her story in the environmental movement and how it impacted her. I can say for me, I think the catalyst was at a lecture at Middlebury College in 1990 when a young writer for the New Yorker who had just published a book came to campus to talk about that new book that he had published and many of the things that he had discovered in the writing of those articles for the New Yorker. Does anyone know who I'm talking about? Bill McKibben. End of Nature had just been published the year before, and he was still a new name on the horizon. Now he's the person we go to. Next slide. In addition to McKibben, 17 years later, just a few years later, I've reached that point in life where 17 years is just a few years later. I had the opportunity to spend a week in Nashville with the Climate Project and former Vice President Gore, along with 200 of our best friends. These were climate scientists, climate activists, climate lawyers, climate philosophers, just an amazing array of people. And we spent the week with Gore, pretty much him setting the stage for us. Anyone who thinks he doesn't know what he's talking about, you're crazy. Next. This is the most commonly reproduced photo of Earth. And I think it shows how really beautiful and finite our planet is. When I look at this photo, I often am reminded of Adlai Stevenson's wonderful quote, "We travel together, passengers on a little spaceship, dependent on its vulnerable supplies of air and soil, reserved for annihilation only by the care, the work, and the love we give our fragile craft." What gets us into trouble is not what we don't know. It's what we know for sure that just ain't so. There are just too many people who are saying it isn't true. It hasn't been determined. We don't know for certain. Why should we take drastic action until we've clarified everything, until everything is laid on the table and we know what we're dealing with? What we know for sure that just ain't so. Next. This is a photograph of Earth's atmosphere at sunrise. And the photograph makes clear how thin the atmosphere is. Sagan used to say 30 miles. Some scientists say 60. We know the further you go into the atmosphere, the thinner it gets. What we do understand about it is that most of the atmosphere is much lower, and what's happening to it is much more significant, and that only is about 7 to 10 miles. When people say, look, space is infinite, everything goes on and on forever, there's enough space up there for whatever it is we're putting up there. No, there's only about 7 to 10 miles, and much of that is getting trapped. And so I think it's very important. Sagan's beautiful example is, if you want to understand how thin the layer of, is that okay? How thin the layer of atmosphere is. He said you would take a coat of varnish and put it around an orange. And that's how thin it would be. That's our atmosphere. You heard IPCC a moment ago. Those of us in environmental science, environmental studies, environmental action live with these acronyms: NOAA, NASA, GISS. That has nothing to do with ESRI. We go on and on with these. IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It is the organization of scientists globally who are doing the most to study all of the data that we have and what it means. They're telling us that this is very serious. In their fourth assessment report, the fourth assessment report, they said, we are certain, up to 90% certain, that climate change is real and that human beings are caused it. In the very next assessment report, which would have been the fifth assessment report, they said we're 95 to 97% certain. Any study of statistics at all will tell you that a figure of 95 to 97% is a certainty you can take to the bank. Next. James Hansen, who I think probably has been the most significant science voice among climate scientists, and what is happening to the Earth's atmosphere and to the Earth's temperature. James Hansen is telling us that many people hold on to the false assumption that the Earth is too vast to harm through human activity, and if harm is done, the Earth will repair itself. Hansen says we've already gone past the tipping point. He said the tipping point was 350 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That's long ago. As of March the 1st, it was 419.52 parts per million. 350 was the tipping point, beyond which repair is beyond reason. So that's important. But let's take that one step further. This is a very familiar PowerPoint that you've seen, if not in articles and journals, in classrooms. It's the article where you, or the PowerPoint where you take the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. This chart goes 650,000 years since this was one of the PowerPoint slides that Gore gave at 2007. The charts now at the Climate Project go back 1,000,000 years. But this is for 650,000 years. And you can see the rise in levels of temperature and the rise in the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And the correlation is as the CO2 in the atmosphere goes up, the temperature goes up. As the CO2 levels go down, which they have, it is a natural part of history of the Earth. That is true. The deniers like to make that point. They suggest we never admit that it is true. It is true that there's been this natural up and down rise in the level of CO2 and the Earth's temperature. But if you notice, for 650,000 years, the temperature, the level of CO2 in the atmosphere was at about 180 parts per million to 280 parts per million. It stayed at that for 1,000,000 years, maybe longer. But I cannot say that with any background because I don't know that that study has been done. Let's just live with 1,000,000 years. As you see, the 180 to 280 parts per million, that's pretty much where the Earth's temperature stayed with the levels of CO2 in the atmosphere. 180 parts per million is about as cold as it could get. We call those, in popular culture, not in a science room, ice ages. And the 280 parts per million, for lack of another scientific term, we call a nice day. The difference between the ice age and a nice day was 180 to 280 parts per million. Today's concentration, I need to go up a little higher on that, is 419.25 parts per million. A nice day was 180 to 280, and we're now 20. Next. And most models, the climate models in the United States and Europe and the ones that the IPCC have been studying tell us that by 2050, there is every indication, every expectation that the level of CO2 in the atmosphere will be at 600 parts per million. After the Paris Agreement, the Paris Accords on Climate in 2015, a group of scientists at MIT took the pledges on climate that every country in the world promised they would try to meet. And as they put those into their computers, they basically said, if everybody does exactly what they said they're going to do, it's going to be almost impossible to hold the level of CO2 below 700 parts per million. But let's be hopeful. It's only 600 parts per million by 2050. The difference between 180 and 280 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere was the difference between the ice age and a nice day. We're approaching 600. The 10 hottest Earth temperatures on record. Anything jump out at you? And if I did this 10 years ago in 2012, you know exactly which years would be up there. And if I went back to 1999, 1998 would jump off the chart. It was a real year. It just fell off this one this year. 98. I've been waiting for 98 to get out because I've been wanting this point to be made. Next. It snows. And I used to live in Vermont, so it snows. And it gets cold. And if I never have to shovel another driveway in this lifetime, it'll be too soon. But in 2010, we had some particularly interesting blizzards on the East Coast. This is one in Baltimore, and here's another one in New York City. It just hid? Oh, there we go. That's okay. Let's go one more. When Beck said the winter storms of 2010 have buried the global warming theory. Where's global warming? Look at these blizzards we're having. Next. Sean Hannity, it's the most severe winter storm in years, which would seem, he said, to contradict Al Gore's hysterical global warming theories. This is a study from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the Goddard Institute for Space Studies. This shows the temperatures of the Earth through December of 2009 to February of 2010. This 3-month period, where those snowstorms came from in Baltimore, New York City, and the East Coast, and where Glenn Beck and Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity et al. Telling us, where did all this global warming go? Look at the United States. You see how blue it is? It was much colder than normal during that 3-month period. Look at Russia, Siberia. You wouldn't want to be there in the best of times, but you really didn't want to be there then. But where is it the brightest red? The last place on Earth you want it to be. The melting of the ice, the permafrost, and all that's happening. That winter where those terrible storms were taking place on the East Coast in the United States, and everyone was saying, see, this proves climate change is not that serious of a threat yet. This was the 5th warmest winter on record. Next. These are ice core drills where the scientists take samples from the layers of compressed ice and snow. They can be found in ice glaciers and skeleton coral reefs and many other places on the Earth. We're losing some of those places, but those core drills go down, and bubbles of air can become trapped and are extracted. And we can tell from where they came from and the dates that the scientists can determine they're from. We can tell what the temperature of the Earth was during that period, and we can tell the levels of carbon that were in the atmosphere and what kinds of carbon that they were. Next. This is an ice cap in Peru that kind of like the layers of a tree, or the rings of a tree that show the age of a tree. In places like Greenland or Antarctica, places where the snow can be 6,000 to 7,000 feet thick, the temperatures and levels of CO2 can be traced back a long ways. This particular ice face is almost gone now. Oh, what happens when the ice melts? We mentioned that just a moment ago. More open water is exposed. You know how the cycle works. The rate of deflection decreases. The rate of heat absorbs increases. The more ice that is lost, the more the process of global warming is accelerated. And the melting of the ice cap is at a rate that no current model has predicted. And it's happened faster than any of the models said it would happen. This should be one of the most beautiful things you've ever seen. Coral reefs, when they are alive, are filled with such power and such strength and such beauty. But many of the coral reefs, 20 years ago we were still debating it. 25 years ago we were still debating it. I don't think anybody's debating anymore what's happening to the coral reefs in oceans all over the world. I need to be faithful to my time, so I'm gonna go. If you thought I was going fast. Right now we're having a collision between civilization and the earth. And there are 4 factors that are causing this collision, and they're happening right now at the same time. They are. The first one I just showed you the chart a moment ago, the spike in the CO2. It's called the hockey spike, where the level of CO2 is spiking right now. The species extinction spike. One scientist who wrote about this said the way to describe what's happening to species extinction, said you would need a chart that's 20 miles long. And the last quarter of an inch would be what's happening to species in the last 100 years. It's scary. Consumption spike, we cannot sustain what we are doing. What we are doing is not sustainable. And the overpopulation spike clearly is just aggravating that with respect to water, with respect to food. And we talked about climate refugees and the problem that's going to be happening just a couple of years ago as all of the refugees were coming from Central America. Everyone was describing them as economic refugees and political refugees, and yes, there was truth to that, but for the most part, at least to the refugees I talked to when I was in Nogales meeting in some of the camps, is that they were climate refugees, that they were farmers from El Salvador, from Guatemala, who could not grow food for their families, and they were coming north in the hopes of finding food. This is a time-lapse U.S. Air Force photograph, time-lapse photograph over about a 6-month period, and it shows 4 different types of energy usage. White lights are electrical power, yellow lights are gas flares, blue lights are fishing villages, and the red lights are either burning forests or fires over which people are cooking. But you can see in this time-lapse photograph kind of the energy usage on Earth. Yeah. Oh, okay. You gotta give me one. Next. This is a quote from a senior vice president of the World Bank in the late 1990s. He said, in the 21st century, we will fight wars over water the way we fought over oil. We haven't stopped fighting over oil, have we? I'm going to stop here. I've got a lot more, but I'm going to stop with this to say there are still entities within the world that are saying this is just a theory. It's still a debate. Let me go one more. Only because he deserves to be quoted. It's not just that he's the editor of probably the most significantly respected science journal entitled Science, but he's also an emeritus president of Stanford. He is a scholar. Consensus as strong as the one that is developed around climate change is rare in science. We stopped debating a long time ago. Thank you.
I'm much shorter than he is. All right, he was bad cop. I get to be good cop. That's a lot of fun in my opinion. So after that presentation, how is everyone feeling? A little nervous, a little anxious, a little depressed? Yes. As somebody who, as early as elementary school, was being taught about climate change, I know what that feels like. One of the reasons why I became a biologist in the first place and started studying not just climate change, but conservation, ecology, evolutionary biology, all those fun topics that you don't hear a whole lot when people are talking about biology. So we've talked a lot about the threat, and I feel like when we discuss climate change, it is almost always about the threat, because climate change in and of itself is such a nebulous concept. What does a 2-degree temperature increase feel like? What does increased drought feel like? What does all of this mean for us as a community? And that is where we come in. Because we are a community, we do have the opportunity to not only mitigate the impacts that we have on our climate, but also prepare for these extreme climate events. So opportunity or threat. We need solutions at every level if we are to succeed. Again, when we talk about climate change, we often talk about it on the global or country scale. You know, what can the US do? What can the world do? Things like that. But we need to also focus in on a much smaller scale. Everything from the individual to the community. A lot of people don't know this, but according to legend, I'll say that just in case it's not true, but according to legend, the plastic bag ban first started in San Francisco. San Francisco, being the wonderfully ecological city that it is, decided it no longer wanted to deal with plastic bags. So they put a 5-cent price on plastic bags, banned it entirely. Plastic bag companies sued them, brought it to the California Supreme Court. California Supreme Court went, actually, that's a good idea. We'll also ban plastic bags. Isn't that great? Plastic bag companies didn't like that. Brought it to the US Supreme Court. US Supreme Court essentially said they can do what they want. If they want to charge 5 cents for a bag, it's fine. And now, almost everywhere you go, there is a 5-cent charge on a plastic bag. Community action works if it is consistent and if you get enough people in your community banded together on a task. To shift into this climate change action mindset, we need to rapidly shift from fossil fuels to renewables while also learning to live with less. I believe John talked about the overconsumption. That's a huge problem. It doesn't work if we just put up some solar panels and call it a day. We need to learn how to start buying things with the intention of keeping them for 5 to 10 years instead of 5 to 10 months. Learning how to drive less, how to use less water, eat food that is grown closer to home instead of food that is grown miles and miles and miles away. This will change the way we live. Obviously, I don't think anyone in this room will deny that. I don't even think anyone on the other side will deny that. This will take work. It will take change. However, this is an opportunity. It is not a threat. This is an opportunity to band together as a community, to live in a way that is healthier, that can decrease things like air pollution, water pollution, light pollution. It can really impact our communities and make us stronger and know our neighbors more. All of that fun stuff, all of that good stuff that we want when we ask what we want in our community. It's not this individual, separated society that no one ever knows their neighbors. It's neighbors helping neighbors, kids being able to bike to and from school, beautiful parks where you can go on the weekends and just hang out and relax with your dog or your cat. Walking cats on leashes has become a big trend recently. I'm trying it, it's not working. This is the opportunity to build climate resilient communities that are more sustainable, more livable, and more just. When we talk about climate resilience, and you might be asking yourself, why aren't we just focusing on sustainability? Climate resilience encompasses all three of those: more sustainable, more livable, more just. It is not enough to just become more sustainable by, again, putting up solar panels or decreasing your water consumption. We also need to think about our neighbors who may be struggling. We need to think about our communities that are hard to get around in if you don't have a car, or if you're disabled, or if you need someone to drive you somewhere. All of these things impact climate resilience. Climate resilience is the total picture. It is not just sustainability. That is a big distinction to make. So the ability to prepare for, recover from, and adapt from climate impacts is called climate resilience. It actually has its roots in the 1960s and 70s. However, back then, it was much more of an ecological concept. It was looking at how ecosystems reacted to climate disasters, such as floods, wildfires, things like that. I wasn't alive in the 1970s. He can probably clarify this, but as far as I'm aware, there wasn't really a big concept of climate change yet. And so this wasn't necessarily focused on climate change, just average everyday natural disasters that happen to an ecosystem. However, in the 90s, it shifted to an anthropogenic idea, focusing a lot more, still in the same basic realm, how do climate disasters affect ecosystems, except now, instead of ecosystems being forests, meadows, you know, all of the natural stuff that we get to hike around in, it becomes human. It becomes cities, towns, farmlands, things like that. Climate resilient communities are prepared for the worst of climate impacts. If you look at models, you can see that there's often a range. These are the best case scenarios, these are the worst case scenarios. It would be really nice if we could just use the best case scenarios and hope for the best. That doesn't work. If we do end up getting to that worst case scenario, we won't be prepared for it. We will not be climate resilient. That's why it's so important to be realistic and accept the fact that worst case scenarios are out there, and that's what we need to prepare for. This means, again, a complete transformation of our society, one that is much more local and with far less consumption. Now that might seem impossible to a lot of people here. They can't imagine living any other way. I can't imagine living any other way. Again, I'm not that old. You may think that, but I'm not. But we have done it before, and we've actually done it in World War II. Next slide. Now, as I mentioned before, I wasn't around in World War II. Was anyone here alive in World War II, or is that just a little too old? No? Okay. Was anyone's parents alive in World War II? Yes, there we go. All right. You probably got stories of what the war effort was like. Women were taking men's jobs. Children were starting victory gardens, collecting scrap metal. People were going without a lot of things that they had gotten used to. I hear there was a ration on coffee. Can't imagine having to ration coffee, but they did it. They did it. They survived. We can do it too. So what enabled that? There's a lot of things that enabled that. You can, well, no one here can ask, but I'm sure if you were to ask people who were around in World War II, they would all give different answers. However, what it boils down to is a fear of loss of life, loss of loved ones, loss of our way of life. All of those things enabled us to band together and sacrifice for the greater good and for the war effort. This is our World War II moment, except now it's bigger because it involves everyone. Everyone in the world will be impacted by climate change. You don't get to opt out of it if you live in Zambia or if you're off in a mansion in Beverly Hills. It will affect you. It may not affect you the same way, but it will affect you. And we're the ones, you and I, and everyone in this room, all of your neighbors, all of your coworkers, everyone you know, everyone in the world, get to decide how our future will be. So resilient communities, now that we've gotten that all out of the way, this is our World War II moment. Resilient communities are very vast, depending on what will impact them. The resilience efforts that need to be undertaken in the American Southeast are not going to be the same as the resilience efforts undertaken here. Barring a truly apocalyptic event, I'm hoping we never experience a hurricane. That seems terrifying, and I'd rather just experience an earthquake over and over again. But in the end, all resilient communities do have hallmarks that can identify them as resilient. First off, cooling strategies. Again, the world is getting hotter, but more importantly, what a lot of people don't realize is that urban areas tend to be hotter than the surrounding natural areas. In science, we call this the urban heat island effect. Houston in particular is one of the worst urban heat island effects, and if you come to the heat talk, we'll talk a little bit more about that. But anytime you have a dense population of humans, you have heat, and more heat than you would if you even went a few miles out into the wilderness. Even in the desert, I know, it's crazy. Maybe not Death Valley, it is a little hot in Death Valley, but maybe if you just go up to like the San Jacinto Mountains or something, then it'd be a little cooler. These cooling strategies are for all incomes, again, getting that just in climate resilience sphere. We have things like tree canopies, white roofs, cooling centers, all that jazz. They also have reduced their carbon footprint by shifting to renewable energy and eliminating other sources of carbon emissions. And this can be a massive effort that includes things like solar panels, wind farms. In Iceland, they use a lot of the thermogenics to heat their, I think they actually use all thermogenics, if I remember correctly. I'm obviously not from Iceland. But they also have things like rechargeable carports that people who have electric vehicles can use instead of gas stations on every block. All of these wonderful things that will impact the ability to cool. They also have a strong local food system from grower to buyer. Here in Southern California, we're actually very lucky. This will be one of the easier ones to implement because we live in a weather pattern system that is frost adverse. It's got a long growing season, and there are a lot of growers around here. Last statistic I read, California produced about 50% of the United States food. It's 50% of the United States, not 50% of the California. So if you're eating something from the grocery store, even if it's just like your local Stater Bros or something like that, it's still probably likely to be grown in California or close by. And also Mexico is pretty nearby, and a lot of food comes from Mexico. So thanks. They also have a sustainable water system where everyone conserves water and uses it wisely. We are in a drought. 100% of people in San Bernardino and Riverside County are affected by the drought. I don't think California has never not been in a drought, but to make things worse, we also live in a desert. So if you go out to the desert, just travel along I-40 for a bit, you look over, you won't see any water. It might be the Mojave River way out in the distance, but chances are you'll just see these, like, we call them ephemeral washes. I think that's what the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers defines them as. They're just seasonal water drainages that often evaporate before they can recharge the groundwater. It's a lot of fun. We don't have a lot of water here. We really need to conserve it. They also have a thriving localized economy that works for everyone. I'm sure everyone here loves local jobs. They love being employed by local companies. They love supporting local companies. This is a resilient hallmark. And finally, they have a low carbon transportation system. This is what I'm personally invested in. I used to live in San Francisco. I didn't need a car until I moved down here, and I was very annoyed that I had to buy one. But there's no sidewalks. Does anyone here live in an area where they can safely walk on a sidewalk from their house to the grocery store? Okay, a couple people do. That's good. Most people do not. Most people cannot, unless you live in a large city like San Francisco or New York. Chances are you are not going to have a sidewalk from your house to a grocery store. You have to drive because there's also no bus system or no bike lanes, no safe bike lanes. So the challenge of creating these resilient communities is that it will take all of us. When we focus in on individual action, it really does take as many people as possible to get the ball rolling. As much as we like to say individual action, at the end of the day, individual action is only the stepping stone to greater community action. That's what we have to focus on. If we want things to change, we also need to work together. Recent years, the United States has been completely polarized for a lot of different reasons. Some of those reasons are actually climate related, as climate change is starting to put undue stress on a lot of people as they fear for the loss of their way of life, their safety, the safety of their families, all that. If we want to actually make a difference, we need to work together, and we need to all come together as a community, no matter your views, no matter your ideals, and work to solve this problem. This problem is not going away. It will only get worse, but that's where community action comes in. The urgency of the situation does not allow for transitional thinking and transitions into other ways of life. We may have been able to transition slowly in the 80s. That's what a lot of my professors said. They're like, yeah, well, if we had dealt with this in the 80s, we probably wouldn't be here today. You know, we could just like slowly but surely inch along into a nicer, easier climate change system. But that has long passed. Again, as John said, we're well past the 350 tipping point. We are now almost 100 points past the 350 tipping point, which is very scary to think about, and that just drives home the urgency of everything. But again, like we said, World War II did not have this long built-up issue. It came quick and it came fast, and we reacted to it and we changed our way of life. That's what we have to do here. So we've talked a lot about communities, neighborhoods, individual actions. Neighborhoods are where everyone can be involved. They can also be as big or as small as you want. This isn't New York City. We don't have clearly defined lines on a map that say this is Brooklyn, this is Manhattan, this is, East End. We can define them however we want. This can be your local bike club. It can be the other tenants in an apartment building. It can be everyone who goes to your kid's school. It can be everyone who goes to your work. We are not defined by these parameters, and that should be very freeing to all of us. If you're worried about maybe the people on your street won't be appreciative of it, but maybe the people in your work will. You can do that. That's a neighborhood. That's a group that can enact action. Neighborhoods are where individual actions can make a difference and can become collective action. Individual actions, again, are these stepping stones to collective actions. If we do not have individual actions, we cannot have community actions. If we don't have community actions, we can't have county actions, state actions, country actions, world actions. Each of these stepping stones are there for a reason, and we must utilize all of them. And you're the first ones. You're the very bottom of a chain that can impact the world. Neighborhoods can prepare for the impacts of climate change and reduce their carbon footprints. More importantly, neighborhoods can determine what they need to do. People in an apartment building probably don't have a lot of say over whether or not they're using solar panels or where they're getting their water from, but they might have a lot of say in fixing leaks in their faucets, running toilets, sinks, things like that. So what you want to do as a neighborhood is dependent on where you are at as a neighborhood. And again, that's a very freeing idea because we will discuss in the coming 4 weeks a lot of ideas for you to take back, think on. You don't have to implement them all, but hopefully at least one of them can be applicable to your situation, your neighborhood, your community. And that's where ANCA comes in. This is the goal of the new program, Accelerating Neighborhood Climate Action. I always get the acronyms mixed up. I work in the government, it's nothing but acronyms. So this is where ANCA comes in. Linda's already done a very good job of describing what ANCA is, but that was a while ago. You might be falling asleep right now, so we're going to go over it again. It was started in Denver in 2017 as a nonprofit, spread to the city of Boulder because they are crunchy people over there. If anyone's going to start a neighborhood climate action program, it will be Boulder. It started in Redlands by people familiar with the Denver program, and we've also worked very closely with the people in Denver to kind of see what they're doing, get ideas of how to implement it here. And again, going back to that community idea, the neighborhood idea, we have taken what Denver has done and changed it to fit what we want to do and what we see as a need in our community. It's guided by a local steering committee, and it works closely with the City of Redlands, University of Redlands, and other climate-concerned organizations. The ANCA program has a 5-week climate action series focused on practical actions at the neighborhood scale, facilitated planning events in neighborhoods to develop action plans from climate action teams, continued monthly how-to workshops involving many local organizations that have the knowledge, tools, resources to assist climate action programs. When you have determined your neighborhood, as big or small as that can be, ANCA is the resource that you will come to figure out how to implement the ideas that we will talk about in the coming weeks. These are the ideas where you can implement things like a neighborhood composting system, a neighborhood fix a leak week, all of that stuff. It's a little sneak preview of what we're going to talk about in the future. So you have to come because I put the seed out there. If you want to know about any of those things, you have to come to the next ones. So what can you do to get involved? Again, we've just gone through a very lovely presentation, very depressing presentation from John about how we're all doomed. And then we got through this program that says, wait, we're not all doomed if we actually do something. So now you're got in. What are we going to do? What do we need to do? There is a climate action series of talks every Thursday for the next 4 weeks. Encourage your neighbors and friends to attend. If you really liked this talk, you want to see more of it, you want more concrete ideas and examples of what you can do as a neighbor, as a mother, father, grandfather, cat owner, dog owner. I don't hate dog owners, I just can't have one in my apartment. You can come to these next few talks. Make climate change a priority in your life. Look at the books on the back table. They have a lot of really great resources. I know a lot of news outlets have been putting out how you can get involved with climate change, what you can do in your own life, how you can improve your impact on the environment. Again, climate resilience is both about mitigating impacts on climate change while also preparing for the impacts that have already begun. And finally, sign up for more information and get involved about how you and your neighborhood can get involved. And just one last thought before we close out and get to the Q&A section of this portion. Remember, climate change is here. It has already begun to affect our daily lives. For more dramatic temperature swings, like that 20-degree drop we're all expecting tomorrow, to harsher storms, we must prepare our families, neighborhoods, cities, and world to react to these threats and develop climate resilience at every level. But just because climate change is here, and just because you aren't some big shot politician sitting in the White House or on Capitol Hill, doesn't mean you can't make a difference. As we talked about with San Francisco, small actions can add up to big results. You have to take those actions, though, in order to see those results. And that concludes the second part of the presentation.
Well, you've heard a lot of information, and we have a few minutes for some Q&A. Who has got Cairo or John? Any questions? Oh, yes, please. Where are the young people is the question.
What's your age on that?
They were in Eureka when we came in.
We got a couple sprinkled throughout here.
Yes, we do.
Thank you for bringing that up. We do want to engage young people, and please bring them with you. Bring the youngins.
I know a lot of we work closely with a professor from the University of Redlands, and I know he's been really good about and it's also just a matter of young people.
And we don't have mics, so we'll just need you to project. We need our presenters to project. Yes. Any other questions?
Well, I was thinking about that exact point because really we need to involve younger people. Any suggestion from your part in how to get them involved? Because I know that there are environmental clubs in some schools and then in the universities, but we really want to get them, the knowledge, the education, and the action from younger people because they are the big consumers at the end of the day.
Yes, so the question is essentially how do we involve younger people? And at the end of the day, there is no right or wrong answer for this. It largely comes down to the community of young people. College students are more likely to be involved than people who aren't college students. It also depends on time and things like that. I also think it's important to realize that a lot of youth is focused on grassroots organizations and sort of this guerrilla style of work and activism. And so instead of these large organizations, like ANCA, ANCA's not that big, but you know, like unlike these organizations that are very structured, very traditional, a lot of young people that I know and that are involved in climate action, they are more focused on things that they can do individually away from the climate or away from the organization. Not necessarily because they don't like the organization, but just because it's sometimes easier to get involved in. If we want younger people to get involved, we need to talk to younger people to see what would get them involved. Why aren't they coming to talks like this? Do they not know about it? Maybe we need to make a TikTok. I don't know. Linda.
I just want to make the point that where we can reach younger people, as young as some of the young children here tonight, in our neighborhoods, there's a lot of things that they can do in the neighborhood.
I just want to add one thing about the young people idea is, and it's not pejorative. They're naive. They don't know they can't. And sometimes I meet with students at the university and they want to go meet the president to tell him, here's what we need to do on sustainability or whatever we need to do, or we need to divest of stocks and companies and energy companies and stuff. And I'm sitting there going, oh man.
You can try it, it might not work.
But it's that energy, that's where we're going to win this thing. Is that they don't know they can't. So in some ways, we just need to listen to them and get out of the way.
Yeah, exactly. And anytime you see a group of people missing in a room, find where that group is and ask why they aren't there, and then work with them to implement changes that will allow them the space to grow and flourish and become active in the environment.
I think there's that question over here. I was just gonna comment that my daughter is a high school student and she wanted to come tonight, but she had so much homework and and I think that's an issue with weeknights.
Yes, yes.
Okay, we have time for a couple of other questions. Any others? Yes, in the back.
This is something just came up to me, and I have never heard anything about this relation between the current. I'm not trying to be political. It's just a general statement, general observation. The current style of war and the environmental disaster the war created. And as a group or as an individual, I think not only we try not to cause a war or provoke the war or increase the war possibility, we should try peace. Because this is what's in my mind is the current bomb explosion, the missiles, everything, is a lot of energy, a lot of heat that causes destruction. And this energy is factored in the climate warming. So this is what I think. There should be a relation. I don't know if there's any study between the current style of war and environmental disaster.
John, did you have anything that you wanted to go up to the mic, and do you have any information to
Well,
share
I-
about that? Or?
Quite frankly, you've made the points beautifully. I mean, I think that is the issue. I mean, war is, the hell of war is what it does to everything and everyone. What we're seeing right now that's happening in the Ukraine, as the level of the intensity of the war today itself is frightening. And what it's doing to the planet. From the beginning of the 20th century and the ways we started fighting war to right on through to the present, to miss that climate change in the environment is a part of that conversation is to miss a great opportunity. What you said was beautiful.
Thank you. Oh, yeah, what do you add something?
Another follow-up is because of the fossil fuel, the war caused the explosion in the fossil fuel field. And that's disaster in terms of environment and carbon production.
Thank you. We have a question over here, a comment?
Where in the city of Redlands do you find the most hope for places for opportunity for change?
Either of you have any?
Or Linda. I was gonna ask the audience, really, where do you see the most opportunity for change?
North Redlands.
What's that?
North Redlands.
North
It
Redlands.
seems like there's a disparity between North Redlands and South
Yes,
Redlands.
yes.
North of the 10 freeway and south of the 10 freeway. I don't know where you guys live, but it seems like South Redlands is a little bit more affluent. You look in the streets, there's nice homes, there's trees out there. But you look in North Redlands and there's a lack of tree canopy coverage.
That's right. Yeah.
If you go up to Panorama Point and around those hills, you can literally see like a dividing line where it's like trees, and then it's just urban heat island.
It's also important to note that poorer communities, which do tend to be communities of color, are going to be more dramatically impacted by climate change, even within the same city. And I have actually had friends who have worked on creating maps of parkland and green space and sort of mapping where the most green space is. And as you said, just across the board, we've noticed that as the socioeconomic status goes down, so does the amount of trees, green space, park space, walkable space, things like that. So yes, definitely in the poor areas of Redlands, that's where we will see the biggest impact and the greatest impact on the zone.
Yes, you have a question or comment?
Comment, last summer when it was really hot, I was looking around for cooling centers because I work a little bit with the homeless. There were none in Redlands where people could go. It was incredible. Cooling centers. I thought, what is that? Why, I got ones in Colton, and people who are homeless are not able to travel. So, but anyway, that's a very simple thing to create right away.
Yes, sir.
If I can speak on behalf of the Street Tree Committee, which I chaired for a number of years, I spent 12 years of my life on that committee. We have over 50,000 trees that the city maintains and takes care of, and we have a very rigid planting program. I have arranged for hundreds, if not thousands, of trees to be planted on the north side. Very few have been planted on the south side. And we actively work under the city council through the, what used to be called Public Works, and it keeps changing its name. But there is an active tree program to cool down this city, and we've built it into our planning programs within the resiliency of this city. So I would encourage you to, you were talking about the north side not being taken care of. Mario Sausalito has worked with us from the north side in the street tree efforts to make sure that we are cooling off this city.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're going to move into a little bit more of a guided discussion. I appreciate all of your comments and wanted to hear a little bit more, but I have some questions for you. So, and I just would like to get maybe 2 or 3 responses, but what is one thing that you remember from the presentation this evening? One thing you remember from the presentation, anyone?
CO2 is off the charts.
Yes, okay, thank you. CO2 is off the charts. Anybody else remember one thing from this presentation?
I was wondering what a cooling center was until she brought it up.
Ah, so you learned about the cooling center. Thank you. Anybody else? One more person. Something you remember. Yes.
The consumption about World War II, more aware of the consumption, less waste.
Thank you. Yes.
Too many people
reaction to what you heard tonight? Gut reaction?
Want to get involved.
Thank you. Want to get involved? All right. Anyone else? Gut reaction?
It needs to happen, it has to happen.
Thank you. Needs to happen and has to happen. Okay.
We're all in this together.
Ah, we're all in this together. Thank you. Thank you. So, where have you or a family member or a friend personally experienced the impacts of climate change?
Well, right here in Redlands, the forest fires have been horrible.
Forest fires, yeah. Right. Anybody else have a personal experience, or a friend or family member who's had a personal experience with the effects of climate change? Yeah.
The power outages when the winds are blowing.
Ah.
Why are you doing this to people?
Yeah. Power outages. And Linda, yes.
My grandchildren were in the heat dome that hit Portland, Oregon.
Oh, the heat dome, yes. Wow, yeah.
How long did it hit?
Yeah. It's very, very, very bad. So what new perspective, and I know some of you have shared this already, but what new perspective or understanding did this talk give you tonight? Any new perspective or understanding about climate change?
Well, it seems like we need to learn from what others have done that have worked. And Phoenix is one of those places where they have cooling towers. Excuse me. And, in the parks, you can go and the towers are up there and they're just blowing out water-filled air.
Thank you. Yes.
I would say I've learned tonight that we can't keep quiet. If I'm talking to somebody socially, I need to say, what are you doing about it? Believe it or not, I think I tend to keep quiet, and I'm encouraged to speak up and be the nag on this thing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Small things matter.
Small things matter.
Small things.
Yeah. Oh, yes, what were you?
I think one of the biggest examples too is that we've done it before. We've been able to change with the World War example that a lot of us haven't lived through. So just to learn from examples of that it can be done because we've been able to change our lives drastically before.
Yeah. Yes. Someone else?
I will say that because mostly the developed countries have developed, and we are saying that the third world countries are making more pollution now, but we have to keep the balance. Same thing with the youngsters and the elderly people, as we are saying there are not very many youngsters here, because the people, elderly people had, I will say, we have created more mess. And so are the developed countries have created more mess. So we should have taken the low income people with us and youngsters with us, and we should provide more for them. We should take the responsibility to provide more for underdeveloped countries and young kids, and also poor communities.
Thank you. So what new perspective or perspective did this give you on the need to prepare and how to prepare? Yeah, yes, please.
Has anybody thought of inviting all of our city councils and these people? And are there ways to find, like they had all that COVID money grants for people to be able to install solar roofs, to plant trees that are, and also, I don't know the tree planting committee, but it seems like fig trees are like weeds in this area. And it would also feed people in places that are, because the north side is considered a food desert. Anyways, and, you know, they could have gutters, rain barrels for people. If we could get money, people who normally couldn't afford these things could get these things.
Thank you. So what is one idea that has come into your mind about something that you could do individually or something your neighborhood could do to help become more resilient to climate change? Anybody have an idea to share? Yes.
Plant a garden.
Plant a garden. Yes, thank you, Tommy. Yeah.
I recently used the wastewater from kitchen, the clean wastewater from kitchen to water the plants.
Yes, wastewater from the kitchen to water the plants,
Yes,
yes.
we get, money for people to do gray water systems.
Gray water system, yeah, yes.
My whole park does not have any recycling, so we should get a movement started to insist that they only clean recycling.
Thank you. So, yeah, get a movement to insist on recycling. Well, I want you to keep thinking, and I also want you to remember the ideas that you had and shared, because in a few minutes, at the end, we've got a sticky wall over there. The wall is sticky, the paper is not. So we'd like you to write your idea on one of those white sheets and just put it up on that wall. And we're going to capture that, and then we'll send that out to everybody so that we can share our ideas and continue to build them. So with that, I think that I'm just going to turn this back over to Linda to close us out today.
What is the city's thoughts about gray water?
I don't have an answer to that, and I'll see if Linda knows from Mike. Do you know what the city's thought is about gray water?
When we built our house 30 years ago, we have a clandestine gray water system that we can turn off if anyone ever inspects it. But we have been watering the berry path down the hill for 30 years with the lemon trees and the orange trees and
All right, so I'm gonna wrap this up tonight, but I just wanna say how, I can't even express, how I feel right now to see so many people here and to hear your responses to what's happened tonight. This is probably long overdue in Redlands and many other communities, but it is time. It is really time. We've got to get serious about this issue. We've got to do whatever we can in this time that we have. So I want to begin by saying,
It's important people know next week the meeting is Tuesday night.
yeah, I'm going to get to that. Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Yeah, Tuesday. First, I do want to thank our presenters, John and Tyra. For us, we're a very low budget, actually we're a no budget operation right now, so that was very, very helpful. And we want to thank all of the volunteers here who helped tonight. There were so many volunteers here, and they all did such a great job, so let's give them a big round. And then I wanted to say a word about our next event, which actually is next Tuesday. There are two of these that will be at the Contemporary Club. And one of those is next Tuesday night. The topic is water, and the speakers will be Hillary Jenkins from the university, and also John Harris from the city, and our own Tyra Delger will be back with us. Right. So, and I think that's going to be a really important dialogue, because we've got to get the city in here as a strong partner in whatever we do, right? Yeah, so they're going to be at every one of the next 4 presentations. So with that, I hope that you guys, if you found tonight valuable, I hope that you will tell friends and neighbors. We have more room at the Contemporary Club next week. And put it on social media, if you do social media. And let's start getting the word out there. And let's start reaching the young people. We should have asked the young people today, how do we reach you? But I'm really happy to see a couple friends of mine, young people who are here today. And hopefully they'll reach out to their friends. So remember that there is, well, we're going to close in a minute, but I do want to urge you to stay for a while. Get to know each other. That's one of the keys. That's why the neighborhood is so important. We need to get to know our neighbors. We need to get to know the people in this room who are equally concerned as we are about climate change. There are some amazing resources back there, some interesting books to take a look at. There's also, are there any cookies left there, Balaji? Yes. Okay. And then Becky's invitation, write your ideas, let's get some ideas up there. Let's get that started. And we'll build on that every single week as we go through the month of March. Yeah, and I think, in the map, take a look. See who's in your neighborhood. This was our effort, and we'll continue to see where the concerned people are in this community, where they live. So eventually we'll begin to see where neighborhoods could possibly be pulled together. Yeah.
And we want your feedback. We want every meeting to be better than the last. And so please turn in a response so that we can gather it, look at it, and do better the next time. And we're thrilled that you came tonight.
Somebody said, where in Redlands do you see hope? I look around this room.
Hang around for a while, get to know each other.